So far in this course, we've talked a lot about the challenges of being a creative editor. We looked at how to set up and work with a timeline. We learned some essential skills needed to effectively edit dialogue, and we put it all to use while sculpting a cut to accomplish the goal of the scene based on the script. What we haven't talked too much about yet is the other half of the editing equation, working with sound and music. The next couple modules will be focusing on exactly that. To start, we're going to learn about the two types of sound you'll be working with in a cut. Then, we'll view a professional sound editing example from a Hollywood film. And finally, we'll deconstruct and analyze exactly how the sound is used in that cut to focus the viewer's attention and elicit the desired emotions from the audience. Let's begin. The first type of sound you'll use in a cut is synchronous sound. Synchronous sound is sound that you hear in a film that's matched or synchronized to the visuals on the screen. We're talking about things like a phone being hung up, a typewriter clicking and dinging, or a glass shattering. Anything that you see and hear simultaneously is emitting synchronous sound. Now, don't confuse synchronous sound with the idea of sync audio, which refers to the exact audio recorded at the time of filming. The synchronous sound that we're talking about might have been recorded on set, but it could also be Foley or library sound effects. Okay, so how, as an editor, should you approach synchronous sound? Should every potential on-screen sound source be equally weighted or even heard? Have a look at this shot from The Imitation Game. There's a very subtle detail going on with the synchronous sound. See if you can spot what it is. Did you notice it? Well, for starters, there's a bunch of off-screen asynchronous sound going on. You've got some crowd walla in the background, and a few phones ringing. But what's going on with the synchronous sound? Remember, that's only the sound from visible sources. How is it being used to focus our attention on what matters in this scene? Watch it again. The subtle detail is in the footsteps. As the two men in the foreground cross paths with the man coming towards us, their already subtle footstep sounds are completely eliminated, giving way to new foot sounds, now in sync with our primary character. Realistically, we'd be able to hear everyone's footsteps in this echoey hallway. That would be accurate based on the geography of the scene. But that would also be distracting, and fail to effectively support our shifting focal point. When it comes to synchronous sound, 100% realism isn't always best. The key to fleshing out the audio bed in any scene is to think about which sounds you need to move the drama forward. Which ones help to tell the story and should be emphasized, and which ones are no longer important. Try to remember this as a general rule for dealing with on-screen sound. The moment a synchronous sound becomes distracting or competes with a sound more important to the scene, its levels should be decreased substantially, sometimes even eliminated. For a good illustration of that point, have a look at this scene from No Country for Old Men, where we see Josh Brolin's character hitching a ride.
Shouldn't be doing that. Even a young man like you.
Doing what?
Hitchhiking. Dangerous.
Once the oncoming traffic passes and their own sounds have dissipated, we begin to hear only the sound of the car's interior. Notice how the interior sound starts off quite loud. The viewer is meant to be focusing their attention on this sound and feeling the presence of this new environment that we're in. After the sound has had a chance to anchor us in our new location, we can fade it down to its lowest audible volume and let it retreat into the background, making room for the next important sound, which in this case is dialogue. Did you hear where the sound dipped? The dip actually occurred while another car was passing to help obscure the decrease in levels and create a seamless transition. I'll play it again. This is where the editor and sound mixer have encouraged a subtle subconscious shift in the viewer's focus from the environment to the characters within it. A key takeaway here is that sometimes levels are decreased based on the intended focal point of the scene, not necessarily scene geography or object proximity. In this example, our position inside the car doesn't change, despite a substantial decrease in the sound it's emitting. When approaching the sound in any given scene, you should ask yourself a few questions. First, what's the goal of the scene? What specific plot points are we developing, and what information are we sharing? How can sound play a role in accomplishing this? What mood are we trying to create? What ambient sound will set the tone for that particular environment? And which objects, people, or things within the scene might emit sound that can help achieve these goals? Okay, so the second type of sound you'll use in a cut is asynchronous sound. Asynchronous sound is sound that does not come from a visible source. It's also known as off-screen sound. Asynchronous sound is often far more powerful than synchronous sound, primarily due to its incredible flexibility and the opportunities it provides the editor for creative storytelling. Think of sounds like dogs barking in the distance, a telephone ringing in another room, or a person crying behind a closed door. None of these sounds are tied to the visuals, but they go a long way towards fleshing out the environment and the events of the story. Okay, so let's quickly review what we discussed in this lesson. We looked at the difference between the two primary types of sound, that is, synchronous or on-screen sound versus asynchronous or off-screen sound. Then we talked about some sound-related questions that you should ask yourself before beginning your work on the timeline. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to deconstruct a professionally edited example that perfectly illustrates the effective use of synchronous on-screen sound to focus a viewer's attention on what's most important in a scene. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. Let's start by looking at an example that perfectly illustrates the effective use of synchronous, on-screen sound to focus a viewer's attention on key aspects of a scene. Here we have a scene from the 2011 film Final Destination 5. At this point in the movie, the main character, Sam, is worried that death is waiting for him everywhere he goes, so he starts to recognize the potential dangers all around him. Let's watch the scene without interruptions.
Samuel, il est toujours comme le bourguignon. Allez, allez. Oh. Hand come through. Oh, watch yourself. 5 minutes. Go like mother, guys. Okay, reach in. Yeah, okay, yes, sir.
Could have been ugly, huh?
Yeah. Bad.
Okay, so it should be pretty obvious how important of a role sound played in this scene. Now, let's look at how the editor and sound designer use synchronous sound to direct the viewer's attention to the various dangers of his environment. As Sam approaches the kitchen, we transition into it with one of the more literal smash cuts I've ever seen, as we see the chef's cleaver chop the head off a fish. The sound of the cleaver whoosh, metal shing, impact onto the wood, and the guts of the fish are all emphasized to draw particular attention to the action. As Sam moves through the kitchen, we hear multiple fire whooshes, sweetened with sizzles, all played at elevated audio levels. On the more musical side of things, we also hear a drone begin, which will begin to serve to provide a general air of danger. As we continue following Sam through the kitchen, suckbacks are used to lead into the various moments, like his POV of the knife rack, which is accented with a bit of a metal ring, and then attention is shifted to the butane kitchen torch. Next, our attention is directed to the exaggerated sound of the meat slicer, and grinder, both of which use sounds far louder and more pronounced than you would hear if you actually were in the environment. And finally, the scene's tension peaks as another kitchen worker almost impales Sam with a roasting spit, the movement of which is accented and highlighted with a whoosh, a hit, and a cymbal crash, all layered on top of the climaxing music bed. These layers of sound all serve to achieve the ultimate goal of the scene, which was to create a sense of terror for the character and anxiety for the viewer.
Could have been ugly, huh?
Yeah. Bad.
They also ultimately foreshadow the events to come in the movie. Without the accents from synchronous sounds to tell the story of this environment, the viewer wouldn't necessarily feel the potential danger of the objects in the kitchen, despite viewing the exact same shots. It's a great, albeit exaggerated, example of using sound to very deliberately focus the audience's attention on exactly what matters in a scene. After each sound told its story and conveyed the information it was meant to get across, it retreated into the background with substantially decreased levels to make room for the next piece of sonic information. So let's quickly recap what we covered here. In this lesson, we viewed a professionally edited scene that relies heavily on the use of synchronous sound to drive the emotion and the drama in the cut. And we deconstructed the synchronous sound in the cut to gain a deeper understanding of how and why the different pieces of audio were used. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at how you can motivate the drama of your scene with sound. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. In the previous module, we talked about how an editor can use synchronous sound to focus a viewer's attention on specific parts of the story and the scene. In this module, we'll be looking at 4 ways that you can use asynchronous or off-screen sound to tell rich and compelling stories. Now, there's only so much storytelling you can do with picture alone. Sound is often needed to clarify the meaning of a moment and provide contextual detail about the environment surrounding the characters. Sometimes, it won't even be possible to convey certain information without sound. For example, is that character just upset? Or upset and up to something? Is the weather outside warm and pleasant? Or hot and stifling? Your choice of sounds can dramatically affect not only the tone and emotion of a scene, but will also determine how well your audience understands the plot as it unfolds. Over the next few lessons, we're going to explore 4 ways that you can use asynchronous or off-screen sound in your cuts. First, you can use it throughout a film to motivate drama and pull the viewer forward in the story. Second, you can use asynchronous sound to create humor. Third, you can use asynchronous sound to simulate the supernatural. And fourth, you can use it to share very specific plot details with your audience. The really special thing about cutting asynchronous sound is that you're completely free of the sound-image connection. Your imagination can run wild, and your only limitation is staying true to the story the film is trying to tell. Alright, so let's begin with using off-screen sound to motivate drama. Motivating drama with sound is all about timing. Just as a character would react or respond to the dialogue of another character, they can react and respond to off-screen sound, affecting their actions, expressions, thoughts, and words. It's a cause and effect relationship that exists between the characters and their world. Sometimes this sound is written into the script as an actual event in the scene, like in this example from the 2007 film No Country for Old Men.
Do you have any idea how crazy you are?
You mean the nature of this conversation?
I mean the nature of you. You could have the money, Anton.
In this case, the sound written into the script was the phone ringing, followed by Wells looks at the phone, Sugar hasn't moved. Wells looks at Sugar, waiting for a decision. The low chug of the shotgun. The phone sound, which began as a startling off-screen noise, became the driver of the drama that followed. Here's another example of an off-screen sound that was written into a script to motivate the drama of a scene. This is from the 2007 film Atonement. The off-screen sound in this case is the buzzing of a wasp. You can see that it was specifically written into the script as a method of attracting the character's attention and drawing her to the window. Once there, she'll see her older sister flirting with a boy she has a crush on, which provides the foundation for conflict later in the film. Notice how the buzzing noise almost becomes part of the score as it comes and goes throughout the cut. At the end, it increases in volume, building tension into the climax of the scene, at which point it disappears completely. The buzzing of the wasp is the off-screen sound that initiates this chain of events, and it was deliberately added into the cut by the editor, per the instructions of the script. In examples like these, when your asynchronous sound is written into the script, your job as an editor is straightforward. It's basically paint by number. Just add the sound that the character is supposed to hear, and you're done. Someone else has already done the thinking about how the sound will serve as a storytelling cue and impact the world of the characters. Your biggest task is to make sure the sound feels like it's existing within the actual environment, which is usually accomplished with a bit of EQ work and a touch of very subtle reverb if the space calls for it. But sometimes your job isn't so easy. Sometimes off-screen sounds are not written into the script. Maybe the sounds are very subtle, or maybe they're needed more by the audience than by the characters in the film. Sometimes their purpose is to communicate something directly with the viewers themselves. Let's look at an example of using subtle off-screen sound to capture the attention of the viewer and clue them into what's happening. Here we have another moment from the film Atonement. The character Bryony is reading from a play she's written. While she's reading, another character, whom you might know better as Theon Greyjoy, enters the room, interrupting the reading.
This is the tale of spontaneous Arabella, who ran away with an extrinsic fellow. It grieved her parents to see their firstborn evanesce from her home to go to Eastbourne. Yes.
Nothing. Just thought I'd watch.
Based on the angle at which he's entering, Bryony can see him, but the viewer cannot. He's behind our field of vision. The addition of the creaks in the floor planks as he approaches,
Parents to see their firstborn evanesce from her home to go to Eastbourne.
and finally the squeak of the door as it opens,
Yes.
do a good job creating the disruptive moment from the vantage point of the female character. The audience is told with sound what the character in the film is experiencing visually. In addition to keeping the viewer informed, sound cues like these will go a long way in smoothing out the transitions between shots and scenes, making the cut flow all that much more smoothly. Always remember that you have this tool at your disposal. These little touches are deceptively simple and can easily be left out, most of the time to the detriment of the final product. In this lesson, we explored how you can use off-screen or asynchronous sound to motivate drama, either by informing the character, the viewer, or both. We looked at examples of asynchronous sound that were written into the script itself, and also examples of sound that were added by the editor for the purpose of clarifying the moment. Coming up in the next lesson, we'll look at how you can use asynchronous sound to create humor and simulate the supernatural. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. Another use for asynchronous or off-screen sound is for creating humor, where the sound itself becomes a punchline or moment of levity. Let's have a look at an example found in a classic holiday film, A Christmas Story. It's Christmas Eve, and the parents are trying to convince the kids to get to bed before Santa shows up.
Oh, goodness, look at the time. I hope Santa hasn't had to pass up this house just because some boys weren't in bed when he came by.
Yeah, I thought I heard Santa's sleigh bells a little while ago going up the other side of the street.
All right, you two, upstairs.
Come on. Hip, 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 hip. Come on, on the double. Hip, hip, hip. Okay, let's get him.
The camera tracks the kids to the first landing of the stairs, where we hear their stomping footsteps and see them tackling each other, rushing to get up to bed. The sound-image connection is established here, so that when the camera cuts back to the parents' reactions, As they listen to the commotion being caused by the kids, we no longer need to actually see the children to understand what's going on. At this point, an editor is completely free to add as much or as little off-screen banging, stomping, slamming, and crashing as they want.
Okay, let's get it.
All you need to do is adjust the timing of the reaction shot to support the sound. Another example of humor being created with off-screen sound is in this scene from the film Forrest Gump.
Oh, hey! Well, ow! Lieutenant Dan!
Lieutenant Dan's wheelchair is sliding down an icy sidewalk and disappears screen right. We cut to a reaction shot of Forrest while we hear the crash of the wheelchair into what sounds like garbage cans and bottles,
Lieutenant Dan!
along with a yell from Lieutenant Dan just to ice the cake.
Lieutenant Dan!
This use of off-screen sound works great for two reasons. First, it saves money in a production because there's no need to film a stunt performer crashing into the garbage cans. This is where it's great to have an editor, or someone who can think like one, present on the production in the early stages. Second, this particular way of playing out this gag is arguably funnier than if the filmmaker had chosen to show the crash and use synchronous sound. Staying on Forrest's startled reaction is great, and no one really wants to see someone in a wheelchair get hurt. Not really great from a comedy standpoint. So far, we've looked at how you can use asynchronous sound to motivate drama and create humor. Well, you can also use asynchronous sound to simulate the supernatural. A great example of this is in the film Oculus. In this scene, we see the father who appears to be hearing something. Turns out, it's the haunted mirror in his office. Happens all the time, right? Have a look.
Okay. Big time.
Director and editor Mike Flanagan used a surreal, whispery piece of asynchronous sound to simulate the voices he was hearing. It's present throughout other scenes in the movie to indicate the presence of this supernatural being, such as here, and here. As an editor, you've got the power to take a relatively normal moment and completely fabricate the presence of something that did not originally exist on the set. Not only will this save quite a bit of money in the budget, but often a menacing or creepy sound is actually far scarier than the actual sight of what's making it.
Who's there?
Many times, it's the fear of the unknown doing most of the work. Alright, so let's quickly recap what we learned in this lesson. We explored the use of sound to create a bit of humor and levity, and we looked at how asynchronous sound can be used to simulate the supernatural or any other creature or character that might not be visible to the viewer. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at an extremely powerful use of off-screen sound, how an editor might reveal meaningful and important plot developments using only a few tiny pieces of audio. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. One of the most powerful uses of asynchronous sound is for sharing very specific and meaningful plot developments with your audience. Let's dig right into an example. In this scene from the 2017 spy film Atomic Blonde, starring Charlize Theron, we've got a moment where her character has a gun to the head of a woman she suspects might be following her. Have a look.
Why the gun, Delphine?
You're not as well disguised as you may think. I know who you are. You're Lorraine Broughton, MI6, and you're here because of the death of Gascoigne.
What do you know about Gascoigne?
Nothing. But if someone is killing Allied officers, shouldn't we all care? Whatever's in that list has people willing to kill for it.
Alright, so the tension in this moment was pretty high. The viewer is wondering if Charlize is going to let the woman go or kill her on the spot. Supporting that tension is the close-up camera shot we're in, as we can see the subtle facial expressions of each character, and of course, if Charlize does shoot the other woman, we've got a front row seat, which could be somewhat jarring and graphic. Fortunately for everyone, it seems like Charlize might believe what the other woman's saying, and starts to lower the gun, but because no one says anything, the tension is still present. Charlize is still making her final decision about this woman. It's very possible that she could make a split-second decision not to trust her and surprise the audience by quickly raising the gun back up and pulling the trigger. Because we're in a moment of relative quiet, where no one is speaking, and the background ambience is muffled, it's a perfect opportunity to fully diffuse the tension with sound. Just for fun, let's add the sound of a door being opened off-screen. As someone else enters the room. Now obviously, these sounds were not part of the original film scene. If the editor had chosen to add them like we did here, the moment between the two women would have been interrupted, and Charlize would not have had the chance to make a final decision about this other woman. That would be a meaningful occurrence in the story, because it would carry this unresolved conflict forward as a loose end to be addressed later. In the actual movie, the filmmaker wanted to fully resolve the matter here. As the gun is lowered, and we're still wondering if it'll come back up and shoot the woman in question, we hear the sound of the hammer disengage as the gun is uncocked.
Whatever's in that list has people willing to kill for it.
This one subtle sound effect completely resolves the tension of the moment. Once we hear it, we know Charlize has no intention of firing the gun, and she must now at least have some level of trust in the other character. As a plot development, we can now expect them to work together a bit. That's a lot of information to convey in a fraction of a second with one sound. In this lesson, we looked at how an editor might use off-screen sound to reveal important plot developments. And we compared how different off-screen sounds in this situation might have substantially altered the meaning of the scene. Coming up in the next module, we'll be giving you an editing demonstration as we craft an invisible narrative with sound. We'll be showing you how to use all the skills that we've discussed in an actual scene. This one's a lot of fun. I'll see you in a bit.